View from the Gutters, episode 159. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book club podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel. Warning, this podcast contains massive spoilers for the topic work. On this week's episode, we discuss Enigma by Peter Milligan and Duncan Fegredo. Thank you to all of our Patreon sponsors for contributing to the show, and a special thank you to this week's episode sponsor, Becca Lewandowski. Welcome to View from the Gutters, episode 159. I am Tobiah Panshin.
Brant Gillihan-Eddy.
Kit DeForge.
And I'm Kayleigh Fleeman.
And no Joe, no Cade.
No
I assume
problems.
that they're together doing Secret Joe and Cade things, putting on a two-man stage show about the man who should have been this country's fourth president.
It's called Jade.
Sure.
Yes. Not sure. It is.
Okay.
It's a fact.
Yeah.
And we are talking about Enigma by Peter Milligan and that one guy whose name I can't remember.
Duncan Fegredo.
Thank you.
Tisk tisk.
Yes, I am properly chastised.
You got it in stereo.
That's what I was looking for, really. The concerto, if you will. Sorry, that is a reference that I realized that nobody else is necessarily going to get unless you were a fan of pro wrestling like 12 years ago. Anyway.
Or you know things about music.
Well, no. So in wrestling, there was this tag team, and I don't even remember who it was, but they had a move called the concerto where they would both grab folding chairs and they would hit a guy from either side at the same time.
That sounds pleasant. Let's do that.
Yeah, well, I got the auditory version of that, of being hit with two folding chairs at once from opposite directions. So, Kit,
Yes.
Enigma was your pick.
Was it?
It was.
Yes. Yes, it was, it seems.
So it was. Would you like to talk about it a little bit? Tell us maybe what it is that initially drew you to the series and why you wanted to talk about it on the show.
Well, I have lots and lots of things that I like to, that I think about when I think about this book. But I think I had mentioned before that this was another one of my chance meetings that could have easily become a misconnection, where there are these books that drop out of the sky at a perfect time, and this was one of those. When I first got my first library job in the state of Washington, I was working way, way out in the boonies, driving 120 miles a day, and out to Grays Harbor, and ran into a comic book shop where the whole reason I stopped was because I wanted to chastise the people who owned it from facing all of their single issues out toward the window where it could be sun bleached. But in retrospect, being upset about sun bleaching in Grays Harbor was probably a little bit moot. Anyway, I picked up this book because it was a Vertigo book for 99 cents an issue, only 8 issues. It was a hard day, and it looked beautiful. It had that Vertigo, like, sort of twangy banjo, funky thing that I like about Vertigo books. And as somebody who was stuck in a strange place between being somewhere new, being someone new, and trying to come to terms with that, it was one of those vaguely divine appointments from the comic gods. So after reading this, I got a different perspective on a lot of recent changes in my life at the time. Certain things like having to, in a rush, come out to my parents, move away from my family, and having this new skin that I wasn't sure was tough enough after I had shed my old one. And it's a book that I always come back to whenever I'm thinking about things changing in myself. And I think it's the perfect embodiment of like a Buddhist adage, as I change, my world changes. And this book has the unique ability, every time I read it, to make me see changes in myself and reflect upon how everything around me shuffles in a different direction once I see myself differently. And that's the core concept, really, of this book. So, with a lot of recent changes in my life, I got to thinking about it again and decided that this would be a good book to talk about personally from where I'm at, as well as for the larger sense of perspective of what comics we tend to talk about on this show, chiefly being image books. I feel that it's rather strange that we haven't had as much opportunity to discuss some of these early Vertigo books, because without their existence, without their presence, and without the innovation of their creator-driven comics, we would not have the image books that we're enjoying now. So I kind of wanted to roll back the clock on something that's both artistically and, I guess, just temporally relevant to the comics that we so often read and enjoy. So that's, I guess, where we're starting.
All right. Yeah. I absolutely love the idea of going back and examining the comics landscape and seeing where things came from to get a better sense of why we are in the place that we are creatively with comics. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So with that, as far as a little bit of history, this book was originally supposed to be under the Touchstone imprint, which was going to be a comic arm of the Disney company. So I like to think about what the hell would have happened if this had succeeded in being that thing, but instead became part of this Vertigo creator-driven part of history under Karen Berger's leadership. This is one of those books that I feel is unjustly unknown for a lot of people, particularly because I feel it does a lot of innovative things with comics better than many of the books that get put on the classics shelves or get selected at your library as signs of legitimate literature. And so I'm really, frankly, rather excited to talk about the innovative directions this book took that we see in other work that we've explored.
Okay.
So,
and like I have to say right off the bat, and I apologize if I'm bringing this to a negative place at all. I'm not the biggest Peter Milligan fan. I think the only thing that I've read by him before is Ecstatics, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that. There were things that I liked about it, and there are things that I like about this, but I'm definitely one to recognize when something isn't necessarily for me or naturally within my wheelhouse. So I would kind of like, if I can, to have you draw me in a little bit and educate me about what it is that you like about it and what it is that you think that is particularly innovative about it, or that you see echoes of today. And I thought maybe we could start with the art, because for me, like, I found that to be particularly compelling, the way that the style changes over the course of the series in this very intentional way.
So Duncan Fegredo has stated to both effects that the art was intentional and unintentional in its change. It's easy a lot of time for us to pick up books and say, oh, well, the artist, quote, got better, which is a remarkably ignorant statement to make. But it's something that in doing this work, it's reflecting that core ethic. As I change, my world changes. The beginning of the book starts out messier, scratchier, sketchier, to further serve to reinforce the direction of the plot, that Michael Smith in this comic is a person without definition, once I think referred to as a pair of trousers walking around, that really isn't terribly sure of his own definition, much less his definition in regard to how others see him. I've been a very big fan of Duncan Fegredo's art because of his ability to manipulate anatomical truth, if that makes any sense. He's, as a Knuckle fan, he's a very big fan of Knuckles. You can take these sort of scratchy, angular, uncertain lines to a different direction, both as a reader and emotionally, as you see these things begin to clear up, because you're able as a reader to feel both, again, consciously and subconsciously, the direction that Michael is taking along with him. As a person who has had the experience of being scratched lines, having an idea of what you might be shaped like, it's definitely transformative when you start to become aware of where you end and the world begins. He also worked on Shade the Changing Man, and I think some similar kind of themes of identity and reality are present in that as well. I think that keeping in mind this larger theme is critical to the understanding of what it is we're actually reading. And my affection for Peter Milligan always comes from his tendency to pull together, I guess, like a patchwork around a concept, and not necessarily expect the patchwork's patterns to match each other or comfortably fit each other, but to ask you to do that work yourself. And I believe it requires a degree of emotional investment in order to do that. That is either a yes or a no for some people. And that's okay. I come to find that I prefer him to many of the Vertigo writers or the British invasion writers around this time because of his tendency to not tell you what you're supposed to think, like, say, Alan Moore loves to do. Tell you what you're supposed to feel, tell you what his ethic is, tell you what his message is, but more kind of make you uncomfortable with what sort of ideas you've accepted to be your truth, and challenge you to redefine your reality based upon your perception. So, I mean, that's why I'm down, I guess. Good way to put it. I don't know.
This was my first Peter Milligan book that I've read, and I really enjoyed his writing voice. I think sometimes in comics, the voice of an author can get lost in all the action of the art, the dialogue. You don't really have a chance to describe things. And I think in novels, that's where a lot of author voice comes from. But in this, I really felt like you got to hear his voice. And to me, it was like all the best parts of Alan Moore and Garth Ennis and Neil Gaiman, like all kind of smatterings of that that were reflected. And so I definitely felt like Enigma fit really well into like this embodiment of what Vertigo was doing at the time, while also feeling like a unique and fresh aspect.
I find him to be Vertigo's intellectual nexus, personally, because of that tendency to marry certain attitudes that other writers have, and to be reflective rather than defining.
Yeah.
And I particularly like in talking about writing and narration, our Lizard as a narrator.
Yes.
You're setting up a concept pretty early that once you understand certain things about your world and yourself, you become alien, both to your world and the people that knew you as who you were before. This lizard narrator is literally forced into a position of trying to define consciousness and awareness and a sense of self to beings that are not capable of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good microcosm for what Milligan is trying to do with readers, that the only reason I guess this sentient lizard can be what it is because of the experience of inspiration and change. The Enigma as a hero, as a character themselves, is only powered by the concept of reality. And I feel like what's interesting about that is that it's a non-power. We always talk about powers as superpowers, as more than ourselves. The Enigma is not that.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely what we do on a daily basis, which is define our worlds based upon our truths and our perceptions. Only he's just a more literal representation of the philosophical truth, I guess, that we experience.
I definitely felt like the reveal of the narrator was a very satisfying payoff, because it starts and you think, oh, it's the author. The author is telling you this as the author. And then it kind of changes and you're like, no, it's just a third person narrator. We don't really know who it is. And then the narrator says that they're a character and that you'll understand their role later. And so you kind of spend the book looking for who this narrator could be, and you kind of go through and it's like, well, it's not Enigma, clearly it's not Michael, clearly it's not the author whose name I'm now blanking on.
Titus.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're going through, and so you're just like, well, it's not this person, it's not this person. And then just that like last panel of the lizard makes it so great. And it's just like, oh, you didn't understand? Okay, I'm going to say it again. This time, keep up. And it's good. It felt like a very satisfying conclusion, even though the book itself kind of ends, or the main story, I should say, ends on a cliffhanger.
And I feel that Peter himself is not a judgmental author in that sense, or in a lizard position sort of sense, because he doesn't really demonize people for a lack of understanding in certain things or a lack of alignment with his own prescribed truth, or the truth inherent in the fiction he's creating, I guess. He's also very gentle, I think, with the reader as far as what he does to try to help you along. His allusions and foreshadowing are really amazing in this book, because they require a degree of reflection as a means to make it more meaningful to the reader. A really good example I can think of is the intense shadow of doubt that he casts over the experiences that you're looking at, through the allusion to a frontal lobe injury. I wrote several notes on this because I'm interested in neuroanatomy. And my first time reading it, I just kind of took it as, oh yeah, brain injury. You know, you've got the head messing with people's brains, the villain in that. But I didn't really think about what a powerful device that could be as far as your acceptance of a certain perception in this narrative. Injuries to the frontal lobe, for those who maybe aren't as interested, I guess you're going to be in for a brief nap. The frontal lobe, what it controls is multivariant in this. Emotion and personality is one of those. Less spontaneity is a thing that when you have frontal lobe injuries, people start to become someone different dependent on where they're injured. Impulse control suffers with a frontal lobe injury. Problem solving, memory, language, initiation, social and otherwise, judgment, and interestingly enough, social sexual behavior, or what many less enlightened scientists deem as abnormal. Abnormal sexual behaviors, excessive speech, less filtration in speech, difficulty interpreting emotional feedback, risk-taking, non-compliance with societal norms. I'm going to repeat that, non-compliance with societal norms, dramatic change in social behavior, pseudo-psychopathic changes in a person's personality, and a difficulty in the projection of future consequences resulting from your current actions, and an overriding of those socially acceptable responses. What we can make of that really changes the idea of the narrative itself, or at least even my initial beliefs about the narrative essentially just being a sense of self-discovery, that the manipulation of his brain or an injury to his brain can also drastically change who you are. That if the tool you have has been adjusted to different settings, or that something has been, quote, broken or altered, your perception alters, your world changes. And with the Enigma's power being what it is, alteration of perception, I am forced into a position of uncertainty that I frankly love in narrative fiction. My favorite books are the ones that make me uncertain. And so I guess that's just something worth pointing out, is the interplay between reader perception, character perception, and the reality that we make of those observations.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in a little bit. The thing that this reminded me of the most in terms of early Vertigo, more than anything, is Grant Morrison, and particularly his run on Doom Patrol, although also Animal Man. But kind of with more of the weird reality is a comic book, 5-dimensional, whatever, kind of boiled out of it. But kind of the same ideas of personality and identity, and relation to the cosmos. But more than that, I think it really reminded me of 50s science fiction, particularly in the sense of sort of general alienation, but also of uncertainty in terms of one's place in reality, particularly when you get that payoff at the ending, where this is a story that is being described by a lizard to other lizards about humans who are beings that are already cosmically beyond their understanding. And then even beyond humans' understanding, there is this entity that is the Enigma that is beyond their understanding. And so there's these levels deep of these are things that exist in the universe of which you have no real conception or ability to fully comprehend what they're about. And what does that say about you as an entity? Essentially saying, we are the lizards here. Mm-hmm. Reality is so much deeper than you can understand. And that's going to make you feel incredibly paranoid, off-kilter, really kind of unable to completely mesh with your surroundings. And I think that really interfaces with this vibe at the time in the early 90s, this sense of, I'm not quite sure how I want to phrase this, but ambiguity about our place in existence. And you have a lot of stories, particularly in this Vertigo mold, where you have characters that are painfully mundane. They're not just everyday person going about day to day. They're, closeted shut-ins who live a life of, I do the exact same things at the exact same time at every day of the week. And I have this one weird perversion or something that's really abnormal about me, but everybody has something that's really absurdly abnormal about them. And that's just the nature of reality. And then something busts into that, and basically just the whole box comes unhinged.
Yeah. I think it's this work is very disturbing and introspective, but I also think comforting. It takes this idea of, well, if reality is a construct and we can disturb that construct, then that's terrifying, right? And then also at the same time saying, but if you're a person who exists in this reality and you have something about you that society deems not normal, that's okay, because reality could just fall apart anyway. So it's okay that you're gay. Like, it's fine. It's a normal thing, because no matter what, in the grand scheme of cosmos, everything is just hanging on by threads anyway. So what are you afraid of? And so I think in that way, it's very comforting. It's like when you see those images of Earth as a very tiny blue marble or very, very small speck, and you're both horrified and comforted by that image. And I feel like that's the experience you get out of reading this.
And I think that's why the lizards are so important as a recurring sort of thing in this, particularly because of, again, our thoughts and our perceptions about things, our so-called beliefs about a lizard brain, that there are things that are demonized that are incredibly normal in people, or incredibly basic in people, that we have a tendency to demonize, but only in certain ways for certain people. When you have Michael's repetitious and expected sexuality with Sandra every Tuesday, this is not normal.
Yeah.
He knows it's not normal. His friends laugh at it because it's an attempt at normal that's so normal that it's sad. And when we have these lizard sort of thing, and this idea of like a baser instinct or a baser sense, and especially the one with sentience, we're constantly casting doubt on the sort of perceptions that we have about what should be and what should not be based upon what comforts us most in our perception. In Michael's case, he becomes a truer and realer self when he allows himself to follow a more natural sense of who he is. It's interesting to see the change in certain things like so-called masculinity in the character when following his truer nature. That as a character, he becomes a more dominant character. He becomes a more both sexually and emotionally virile person, in acceptance of his truer nature and rejection of societal norms. I am interested in what that means, I guess, because I think it's easy to say for some people that with the Enigma's powers, or with some of the things that happen in his life, that maybe the vagueness of the narrative in what that actual relationship is and what it means could potentially cast some shadow on the so-called acceptability in our minds too of queerness in our own lives. Whether or not his story is a positive queer story is something that I find fascinating when people read this book, particularly because they're still, despite Peter's insistence, trying to fit certain actions and reactions of a character into their own perception of how a person should act and react based upon their own experience. That little ball thing, I think, it is critical in understanding what it is we're reading and what it is we're looking at. Because the idea that everybody should conform to our expectations makes everything so small too.
Yeah.
That our world is tiny and can fit in our pocket. Even though we live in it and experience it every day, we have this insistence on keeping our perception and our reality and our truth small and easy to carry and easy to manage.
I think it's also important, and this kind of ties back into the conversation that we were having last week regarding Parker. I think this is a work that really needs to be understood in the context that it was being released in of the early 90s, particularly in regard to the him coming out as gay in this book. Like, as little change as there's been, I think that the gay experience in America is substantively different now than it was 25 years ago. You know, at a time when they were still actively being demonized in the media, that you had the AIDS crisis killing people left and right, that this is still something that mainstream America was struggling to even grasp the basic parameters of. And looking at the journey that the main character takes in this, and his experiences, like, this is, I don't know. I mean, it feels like there was this really, again, and I mean, I hate to harp on this word, this strong sense of alienation going on here that, I mean, as bad as it is, was exponentially worse at a time when it's like, oh my God, my son is gay. He's going to die of the AIDS at any minute because of, you know, X, Y, or Z. Like, there was a lot more, I guess, paranoia, or at least that's the way that it felt. I don't know.
Well, I think this is another large reason that I felt this was something that should be discussed, because we so frequently like to talk about how representation matters on this show to limited effect. And in this particular case, we have a story that is literally about seeing and understanding a sense of yourself in a fictional narrative. Particularly in that time period, finding and seeing yourself in stories that were not hidden, we're not on the fringe, we're not dirty, we're not bought from somebody in the back of a certain shop after a certain age, would be transformative to a person. That this idea of Titus as a gay creator, trying to both create an image and a reflection of his experience, and effectively a mirror for others to look into to see themselves, is critically important. This idea of becoming lovers with fiction in this story is also something that really fascinates me, because it's really about how media and fiction is that mirror for some people. And that in loving the Enigma, Michael's learning to love and understand himself. And this dual idea for many people that if you put those things out and people see them, it will make them gay. You know, that this or that seeing these things, that admitting to these things, that bringing certain things to life will make people aware of something and thus change them, is another huge question that comes up in this and interests me. And given that time period that this was made, a lot of rhetoric all over the board about all kinds of issues was about how we as human beings don't have fucking choice. We're going to see something and we're going to become that thing, that we're going to monkey see and monkey do, is so fascinating to me given the passage of time.
Kind of to tag off of what you're saying, which fits into something that had been bouncing around my head as I was reading this. I feel like Michael's growing and accepting of himself is kind of, it's the focus, right, as far as character development. But we also see the Enigma growing and changing and accepting himself and his role in society and society's role to him, and and human's role to him. And I think he becomes more human, and he learns to love a human, or at least love in the way that he understands. And what you're saying about media and Enigma perhaps being a reflection of how we treat media could also then be how media sees us. Media isn't something that's just put out there by some unknown creator. It's made by people. It's made by people who reflect upon things, who think about things, who feel things. And so if they start to turn media around to reflect their audience and to love their audience just as much as the audience loves it, like that becomes a beneficial relationship between media and consumer. And I think in that way it mirrors very much so the relationship between Michael and Enigma, where Enigma is turning around and reflecting these aspects of Michael and is changing, is becoming merciful in the way that he understands, is becoming loving in the way that he understands. And there's always that sort of filter of, well, he can't quite get to that point, but he's trying. And that's important, I think.
It's an active choice and intellectual intercourse that makes it an environment where something can be made that is good and safe and understood. I want to ask Brant. I know you've been very patient. I'm intrigued by the fidgeting.
Oh, I'm just fidgeting.
Yeah.
There's nothing behind it per se. I mean, for me, the interesting thing about this book is that it's I experienced it kind of as a person pressed up against glass. Like, I can appreciate its social significance, its artistic significance. Like, and I see a lot of what you guys are talking about, and a lot of it passed me by, both in my own reading of it, and I did a bunch of reading. I tend to, the more complex the book, the more I go out and start trying to find out more about it.
Same.
So of course I read interviews with the group who worked on it and all this other stuff, and so I kind of walked away from it feeling very much like a spectator. Like, I didn't feel connected to the book in almost any way. And some of that might have been that I read it very quickly, and so didn't have time to kind of let it saturate me. And so I might, show up a week from now and be like, whoa, it's finally hit me that this thing happened. But also on the flip side, like, a lot of the narrative experiences of that character are not what my personal arc has been like. Not only did I grow up in an environment that was incredibly permissive of a wide range of behaviors, but I also never really experienced a lot of doubt about the nature of myself. I certainly experienced a lot of doubt about the nature of myself in relationship to other people, as far as, how I was accepted or not or whatever. And so, like, those pieces, I understand the clockwork behind them, but I didn't walk away feeling affected by them, I think. But what was interesting to me about this book is that it actually, I had never heard of it before. You recommended it, Kit. I don't think I've actually ever read anything by Milligan before either, even though I theoretically should have run into him, considering some of the things that he's written and the things that I've read. So if I have read him, I don't know it, is basically what it comes down to. Because it's only been since doing View from the Gutters that I've become much more conscious of the creators of a lot of the stuff I read, especially when I was working in comics. I read at such a volume that, like, the names of all the artists involved just kind of blew me by unless something really gripped me. But this book shows up on a lot of people's lists as, like, if you're going to hand an early Vertigo book to somebody, or a seminal comic work to somebody, you should hand them this book. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I've been thinking a lot about Alan Moore in the last month or so, because we kind of got on a string of shit talking him as much as we were shit talking Jeff Johns a year ago.
2 years.
Yeah, it's for 2 years. And so I feel like my the intensity of my grumpiness towards Alan Moore has cooled dramatically as I think about him in reference to what he's trying to do and what the nature of his concerns are and why. But the one thing that I think rings true for me is I think it is the case that the more someone reads or consumes a medium, the more kind of like instinctually, I think consumers become aware of techniques and intents and things being used to manipulate them in the truest sense, like to make emotion and thought happen.
What a literary device, if you will.
Right. And so, like, I don't know a lot about film theory, but I've watched so many movies at this point that when some film theories are explained to me, I'm like, oh, right. You mean like when they do this thing? And it's like, oh, okay, great. So I think it's the case that, you know, when you pick up a work by someone like Alan Moore, like you can tell it's intended to have artistic weight. Like it's not just like, here's Popeye fighting Bluto. Like it's like, this is meant to be art. And of course, that's the thing that's really frustrating about certain things, because it's like, and we've even said this about some books, where it's like, clearly you thought you were making art, you were very wrong. Or you didn't even know you were making art, and you can tell that that wasn't your intention, but you really accidentally stumbled onto something. And so reading Enigma, I was like, I felt like the creators involved had a very clear... Sorry, I'm kind of ping-ponging all over the place. I think Gaiman's Sandman is a good example. Gaiman. Where it's like he touched on some things and he really pulled like some things out of the ether, but I don't think that was like, he didn't sit down one day and be like, this is the story I'm going to tell. It's like he stumbled into that stuff. And then occasionally he stumbled into artists who expressed those things that he ran into and was like, ha. And you're like, whoa. I feel like this group, it felt much more intentional, even to the point of discovering after the fact that it wasn't as intentional initially. That some of the story beats were much more about the collaboration of every person involved. That I was surprised. Like I was like, well, clearly Milligan sat down. He had this 8-script thing. This is exactly what he wanted to do. He found the perfect artist to do it, and he did this. But it was like, no, apparently this whole thing started because DC acquired the rights to the Charleston characters. They were, Milligan was doing a pitch for the smartest man in the world in the Charleston comics, whose name I cannot remember.
Oh, the guy who's not Ozymandias, because Ozymandias is Watchmen. It's it's not Mr. A.
But yeah, like apparently he used to wear long sleeve shirts and shorts but they,
oh my God, I should know this.
He started working on a pitch for that and then was working with the other folks, and like the more they were talking about it, the more they were like, oh well, no, like maybe it should be our own character. And then not Karen, but the other editor involved, whose name Art something, I think.
Well, Sherilyn Van Valkenburg did the letter or colors.
Yeah, and this was somebody who was like
Art Young.
Yeah, Art Young. Well, so I was reading an article with him where apparently like he had at one point brought up the homosexual bent about it, because he was actually going through that process, and apparently Milligan was like, yes, let's talk about that more. And like, so like this was a very like alchemical artists collaboration thing. So there's things about like that I'm really excited about, in the sense of like understanding this piece. But like the actual weight of it, I'm just kind of like, yep, that was a thing that I read, and it's complicated and interesting. And like, so I walk away from it being like, yeah, I want to put it in the hands of other people, but I don't feel like connected to it this way. Which,
and
I mean,
that'll
that happens.
happen. Yeah. I mean, that'll happen. And that's exactly what we talk about when we talk about representation and other things, is that, again, there are many, many stories that I definitely have had that feeling in my life of like, I can understand how the clock works, but I don't need it.
Right.
But it's just a fucking clock to me that like, I can see how it works. It doesn't intrigue me. It doesn't give me anything new. I can look right at its face and it's going to tell me exactly what it is. Doesn't mean I have to be... it doesn't mean I have a relationship with what time means.
Right.
I don't know. It just kind of, that's a thing that happens with people. And it's something that I think a lot of the times we talk about what's important to other people.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, or we talk about what should be or what we feel should be important to other people.
Sure.
This is important. This is big. This has meaning to the larger timeline or to us. And so I find that a lot of the times things that we're looking at and reading feel like they're being selected on basis of what we feel should be important, rather than what we feel are important to ourselves in what we look at in story. So yeah, I thought it would be fun to kind of share something a little more personal and a little less off the list.
One super big rabbit hole I did fall down in relating to the art was trying to understand whether or not the shift in visual tone was purely intentional or about the artist's skills changing or coming into a style or whatever. And yeah, I found the same kind of thing where sometimes he's like, yeah, I definitely did that. Totally. Like, of course. And then there's other times where he's like, well, maybe that's not quite exactly how I intended it. But the one thing that was super stood out to me about it, Tobiah and I saw each other a few days ago, and I was commenting on my initial perusal of the book, and I had been looking at it digitally. And I was like, I'm not really interested in the art. Like, I'm finding myself really stymied by it. It reminded me of stuff that showed up in Sandman that I was not particularly fond of. And then when I was looking at interviews and articles about the book and trying to kind of get more context about how it was created, some of the digital scans of the pages that the various news outlets were using were dramatically different in coloring, precisely in brightness and in texture than the digital scan that I was using. And then that's why before we recorded, I grabbed your book and was like, I want to check something out here, which is that, you know, if we often talk about the narrative content of a book and like understanding it in its place in time, but I think it's really important for this stuff that was generated in the 80s and 90s to remember where the technological printing aspect comes into play. This book is way more beautiful on paper, like straight up. The art being backlit or being brought up in brightness and intensity like washes out the line work in this really strange way, because like it wasn't as though when I compared the two scans side by side that anything was missing. It was just literally like, oh, when it's duller, when it looks like it's more closer to the consistency of paper, it captures something about the art in a way that like an almost flawless digital projection of it seems almost washed out and not as dynamic.
I wish I had it at hand, but I was reading this thing a while ago that was showing side by side like a scan of Hellboy, the way that it was printed versus like this digital edition that they did that was like direct from the artist files. And like it was just fucking night and day, just the way that certain elements like really pop off the page versus being kind of sucked into the background. So that can absolutely make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I guess I'd never really truly unpacked it for myself mentally because most of my experience around the digital to analog divide about writing has been about the argument about whether or not the tactile nature of interacting with a book changes your experience of it. But of course, like, you know, artists argue with each other all the time about what weight do you do certain kinds of art on, and how do you present it, and what kinds of, you know, glass do you put it behind. And so it makes complete sense that a graphic medium would have that same problem on any mass-produced scale. But this is one of the few works where I was just like, whoa, this makes a huge difference. And yeah, I just was really like absorbed by it for a while.
I'll never get rid of my singles. First off, because they were such a special thing to find, I guess, at a special time, and like emotional connection to those singles. Secondly, because of how they felt, like physically. And thirdly, because those covers. It was another thing that they don't really give us the benefit of really in this trade. They had those like foil accent kind of covers, the slight gold sort of glossy print things on those covers, the really, really album art.
Yeah, you had a name
album
for it a
cover
couple
feelings.
episodes ago where you said that you like gave in to cover something. Like you were trying to refer to the fact that like the art on the cover does not always match what's inside, and like you got suckered into buying some book because of the cover. But you had a great little name for it. I'm gonna have to like go back.
Oh, it was
listen.
on the Kill Shakespeare episode.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
cannot remember what you used, but it was a pretty perfect description.
Well, and it's not quite false advertising. It's kind of like the adage about don't judge a book by its cover and everything like that is bullshit and stupid. And I hate that people like try to blow this up as if there's something innately special about you, I guess, or something, because you're not taken in by appearances, which it's fucking bullshit. Like it's all fucking bullshit, and it completely discredits an entire line of work that people have. It's fucking reductive and shitty and childish that people keep saying this.
People are paid a lot of money to make you judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, but in the case of these, there definitely was this reflective mirror again. This relationship between what I saw and what I felt and what they chose to show me, I guess, with those covers. And it really is kind of a shame to me that I feel like this book is very different when you pick up each individual issue too, because of how drastically and dramatically different those covers are. Particularly the cover they have with Envelope Girl really stuck out in my mind, I guess, as I was reading it and as her character came up. Like I love those Vertigo 90s alternative rock covers. And I have long espoused the dream that if I ever were to, for whatever reason, lose all conscience and become rich, I would tile my floor so that I had clear tops on the tiles and that I could store my single issues underneath them, just so I would be able to look at those issue covers every day. Something like that, so that I could switch them out and that I could see them. I think it's such a huge waste, particularly as a Vertigo fan. As thrilled as I am that this ever got a reprint, ever, that people miss out on the experience of picking up one of those beautiful covers once a month.
Yeah. No, it's I just picked up issue 12 or 17, I want to say, of Sandman. It's the first appearance of Lucifer. Got it for super cheap because somebody bent the back page. But anyway, those Vertigo singles are just so pretty, even when they don't really mean to be, when they're just kind of like, this is just our monthly, we'll just put it out there. They're so beautiful compared to a lot of what's coming out now. Not to say that there aren't beautiful singles coming out now. Monstrous is a good example of something that's like gorgeous. It has fantastic paper. I love reading it in singles. I don't know if I'll buy it in trade when it comes out.
Sexy singles near you?
Yeah, sexy singles near me.
Nice.
All day, every day. In fact, I'm currently sorting through all the sexy singles.
Get it?
Yep, at work. But no, it just, I don't know. There's something that kind of got lost when we started to do this change to the high gloss, super bright Marvel and DC things that are coming out, and not to say that they don't look good or that the writing's bad or that the art's bad, because it clearly is not the case. But there was something that was lost in kind of that gritty underground feel of Vertigo comics at that time.
They did release like that entire book of Dave McKean covers for Sandman. They made an entire book just for they did Sandman desk covers, and they did those it just seeing those issues too, and seeing the extraordinary amount of work that Dave McKean did in this collage work was one of the major reasons that I got into Vertigo as an imprint at all. Because as a person who was majoring in art, and as a person who not only did visual art but studio art with my hands, I have this anger and this resentment, I guess, toward the lack of intimacy that graphic design has, that I just didn't feel with Vertigo because there was that direct engagement with other mediums. And as such, a general attitude of respect toward art in many different iterations that I feel bleeds through their entire spirit, I guess, about their books. With Enigma, we do also have this painted cover by Fegredo, who, it's my understanding, isn't terribly comfortable with a lot of colors as it is. I may be wrong, but I seem to have read something about color blindness in there, or color deficiency. I don't know. This is lovely. As Vertigo as the front feels, the back definitely makes up for it with that snazzy shirt that Michael has on. Good Lord.
There is one more thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, which unfortunately, I don't know that I really have any strong conclusions of my own, which is the indefinite ending of the book where they are all marching off to go and confront Mother in a very Binding of Isaac kind of way. And I'm curious if anybody had any strong feelings about the build up to that confrontation, the lack of payoff, how they imagine that going down.
I kind of mentioned this earlier. I didn't feel like there was a lack of payoff. Because in many ways, to me, the story wasn't, there's a problem, we'll fix it. And now there's a bigger problem and we'll fix it. And now there's another problem and we're going to fix it. It was about characters. It was very, very character driven. So to me, the resolution was Enigma and Michael and
Titus,
thank you. I will always forget his name. I don't know why.
I only remember it because of the biblical allusion.
I should just remember that stupid sports ball player in the stupid Final Fantasy game.
I always think of that sitcom.
Asymmetrical shorts.
Yeah, asymmetrical shorts. God, why?
Crime against fashion.
But no, to me that was the resolution, that they all got to a point, emotionally and growth wise, that they could confront this thing, this embodiment of God. And then to have everything kind of wrapped up by the lizard at the end, speaking to you, the reader, or the lizard, it brought it down for me. I don't feel like there needs to be a resolution in that. It doesn't keep me up at night. Oh God, what happens next? I hope that they come out with another issue.
Enigma 2.
Yeah, it happens again.
So you feel that really the resolve to confront her is the resolution in and of her itself.
And not just the resolve to confront her together as a creator, a creation, and an audience. These three things marching off to confront God.
Getting
I think
both personal and literal.
Yeah.
On that. Admitting your present gives you enormous power over your past. And I think a remarkable amount of people never get to a point of resolution in their lives because they don't know how to examine themselves. They don't know how to admit their own fictions and their own constructs of what their reality is. Like Michael's case, it required him to drag secrets about himself out into the open in order to get any sense of power of who he was, because he had to hide so much of himself. On a personal level, in picking up this book, I was definitely in the same place. It was something where, because I didn't have a good sense of resolution or resolve in who I was, or a good understanding of what kind of person I was at the time I was picking it up, it felt oddly comforting to get to that end as kind of a reassuring and loving thing from someone who understands, that could say, if I had to struggle through things to see who I am and what I'm capable of, I can be ready to deal with the things that always frightened me, the things that always had so much power over me, that always created such an uncertainty in my sense of identity in the first place. In the case of his mother, there's obvious issues with mental health here at play, and the whole deal with the well and everything else. And so to understand yourself, you know how that's going to end. I don't think the author has to go through and tell me how that interaction went, because I can surmise from the change in the characters how that's going to go down. Similarly, again, in my own life, coming to a better understanding of the person that I am has taken a lot of the teeth out of the things that I was once afraid of, or that I once thought were the immutable truths, the Bible of my existence. Those realities are very, very changeable once you've changed your perception.
Once you realize what story you're telling, you gain the ability to tell another story.
Well, sure. And understanding where that goes, you can start to see the patterns. You can start to see how the plot is going to unfold, and know that you are an author of that, as opposed to just a passive plaything character in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Kayleigh points it out very well when she says that it has to, and it somewhat requires, a sense of audience understanding, participation, a sense of actor's awareness of actor, of the stage knowing what it is, where the lights end and the audience begins, and all of that. That it's not about performance anymore. It's about admittance of fiction and what you do with that once you know that you don't have to be a part of the falseness of it.
Cool.
The Big O is my favorite anime for a reason. That's what I'm trying to say. It's the exact same themes. Shit's important, yo.
Yep.
Yeah.
Especially Queen-inspired theme songs.
Why not me?
So is there anything else that we wanted to cover about Enigma before we moved on?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then thank you very much to everyone for joining us this week.
For a low-key episode.
Yeah, I feel like we've all been doing NPR voice this entire time.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish I had a mug of something to quietly sip. So before we go, next week we will be reading Bitch Planet. And Kayleigh, this is your pick. So why don't you just kind of give us a sense of what Bitch Planet is about if someone out there has never read it?
So, Bitch Planet is written by Kelly Sue DeConnick with art by Valentino Delandro. It is an absolutely beautiful work, and I really love it. It focuses on a dystopian society wherein women are required to behave in compliance to the societal quasi-religious norms. Examples of compliance are being a faithful wife, being pretty, being skinny, being quiet, being religious, being meek, basically all those good 50s Christian woman qualities.
So kind of ultra-orthodox patriarchy?
Yeah.
Taken to an extreme?
In many ways, but it is done with the veneer of this is a free choice.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
You are allowed to make this decision. It's merely discouraged that you would make another choice. What happens to women who are not compliant, or whose husbands, fathers, brothers, whatever, have gotten sick of, is that they get shipped off to a prison. This prison is on a separate planet. and is affectionately referred to as Bitch Planet, because that's where all the bitches go. And the idea is that you can be rehabilitated there and come back. Nobody comes back. And you have these women who are, as the comic sells it, caged and enraged. They are products of a very toxic prison industrial complex, as one we currently have. They are products of oppressive patriarchy, as what we currently have. They are products of oppressive and toxic racism, as what we currently have, but all taken to extremes. And so these women, or some of the women who are on this prison planet, are given the opportunity to escape if they participate in this sport that was created for men. It's called Megaton Ball. You have on a team any number of players as long as their weight equals 1 ton. So you are allowed to have 1,000 pounds worth of players, and you can distribute that weight however you want. So these women are putting together this team, and kind of at this point, we are now on issue 7. We're doing a lot of exploration of this society and how women are treated in society, and how people of color are treated in society, how anybody who is designated as not in compliance with societal norms are treated. And I think, and we'll go into this when we record on it, I think sometimes when people are pitching it, they will misidentify it as a 101 course on feminism. It's not that. It is a wake-up call for people who already identify with ideals of feminism and activism, of basically, well, you say that you're this, but why the fuck aren't you doing anything? And I think it's a really important work, and I really love it.
So maybe a little bit of allegory going on there, just a little.
No,
It's.
I
need to ask one big question of you,
What?
Kayleigh, while we have this. Why haven't we changed our Wi-Fi's name to Bitch Planet?
because it's important to have Harry Potter references,
Okay.
and also to have the devil's number as our Wi-Fi password.
That was the biggest question I had about Bitch Planet. Thank you.
and I'm not 100% certain, but I think issue 8 might be dropping between when we record this and when we record into the next episode. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Yeah, that one is tough to tell.
Okay.
It's been a little slow. So issue
Okay.
7 just dropped.
I will double check after we wrap up, and I will edit in whether issue 8 is something that people should look for if they're going to be reading this in the next week. So look forward to that. Hey everybody, this is future Tobiah. 2 quick points. I was wrong about issue 8. Issue 7 dropped in February, the month before we record this. But issue 8 is not coming out in March. It is coming out in April. So it won't be out at the time that we do our recording. Point number 2, Kayleigh asked that I add a trigger warning for sexual violence for issue number 6 of Bitch Planet. So if you're planning to read the series and that is something which you find troubling, you may be advised to avoid issue 6 specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And we will see you all next week when we're talking about Bitch Planet, aka Lady Planet, if you're ever in Olympic Cards and Comics.
Yep, it's Lady Planet.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
This has been a production of View from the Gutters. Thank you to this month's show sponsors, Jeb Corzelius, Mike, Jeremy Ballard, Chris Bianculli, Tony Cortero, Curfy Gonzo, Addison Appleby, Brian May, and Shopping Mall Krampus. We hope you'll join us next time for discussion of our selected title. In the meantime, we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr. Become a sponsor of the show at patreon.com/viewfromthegutters. Like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we upload old episodes, as well as video content including panels and other events. Or leave us a review on iTunes, as it does help new listeners find the show. We encourage you to send any questions, comments, or recommendations you may have to contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep reading.
Lady Planet.